Oh, that took a lot of effort, didn't it? It did. That took a lot of effort with my little bean. It did. Hello, BookTube, and welcome to your Daily Penguin. This is our tour through my Penguin Classic wall, book by book, author by author, and we are sticking with a vein of nonfiction for the event of Nonfiction November here on BookTube, hosted by Olive at a Book Olive and a bunch of other great booktubers, designed to celebrate nonfiction in all its infinite variety and to get you to read more of it if you don't read that much of it. If maybe it still lingers under the cloud that it probably acquired in school for you of being tedious work instead of enjoyable reading. And as sort of an adjunct to that, here for the Daily Penguin, I am specifically looking, when I'm reaching for the next day's Penguin, I'm looking for nonfiction. And yesterday we did a very mordantly apropos book, A Journal of the Plague Year by Daniel Defoe. And right next to that, on the same shelf, was another book that is also, in a way, mordantly relevant. This is, in my opinion, Defoe's greatest work. This is a tour through the whole island of Great Britain. A nice, big, thick thing. Could have been a lot thicker, but we'll get to that. This is a work of nonfiction in which Defoe tours around the country and writes in detail about everything that he sees, everybody that he meets, all of his experiences. And it's bitterly apropos because travel is extremely restricted these days, thanks to the pandemic. There are a huge amount of logistical hurdles to go through if you're being conscientious. If you're not, if you're ignoring everything and the health of everyone around you, then you'll just act normally, which is absolutely maddening. It's absolutely, if I may be allowed to digress for a moment, it's absolutely maddening to see that and to realize that the President of the United States has 100% effectively weaponized it as a culture war item. If you do not wear a mask in America, you are a Trump supporter. And if you are a Trump supporter in America, you do not wear a mask. It's absolutely maddening to watch members of the news, members of the media, go to these maskless super spreader rallies in order to talk with people now, in the middle of November, who adamantly, completely, just matter-of-factly believe that Donald Trump won the presidential election through massive, unprecedented fraud. And that part is not so much maddening anymore. You get used to it after a while. The thing that Trumpism has done is show you how many Trumpists are in the country that you didn't know about before, but they were still there. No, the thing that's maddening is that these reporters, of course they're wearing masks because they're normal people. But in addition to that, in order to talk to these creatures, they have to use 6-foot boom mics. Like they were going to the zoo to interview a weird, maybe slightly demographically interesting, but indisputably dangerous animal. So we're not going to get too close, so we're not going to spend too much time. Instead, we're going to interview from a long distance away because you're a danger to everyone around you. It's so humiliating. Anyway, I don't know where that came from. Let's send it back where it belongs. So these were dispatches that Defoe wrote up. I mentioned yesterday that he started writing his marquee novels when he was in his 50s, but he actually wrote for his whole life. And I would argue, much like Samuel Pepys, much like, for instance, Jonathan Swift, he really couldn't help himself. I would argue that he wrote as a means of breathing, almost. And the occasion for this, one of the larger sociological occasions, was a change that was happening in English life at around the time he was writing these things and publishing them in installments in the 1720s. And in that time, the roads of England, travel in England, was suddenly becoming safer than it had been. The editor of this volume, Pat Rogers does a great introduction to this volume, worth the price of admission on its own. Pat Rogers also commits, what is it? How is it referred to? Let me see here. Abridgment does not have to be desecration, even where a major writer is concerned. Yes, it does. The perpetrator of this desecration does a great job nevertheless, this is abridged, and it shouldn't be, is my point. It shouldn't be. Good Lord, when are we going to stop treating our classics this way? Don't tell me what parts you want me to read and what parts you don't. Don't give me a chapter in which whole paragraphs have been excised, sometimes with a diacritical mark and sometimes without. Don't do that. Just don't give me Plutarch's Parallel Lives that has 8 lives in it. Because, you're not really going to be interested in all those Greek archons, are you? This is Daniel Defoe. This is not Ryan Smallwood from the same time period. This is Daniel Defoe. So if he wrote a great work, you give me the great work. I'll decide how much of it I find interesting and how much of it I don't. But abridged works, nobody knows this work from Daniel Defoe. I mentioned yesterday that he wrote a handful of books that everybody knows, at least by their title, but he wrote dozens more works that nobody knows anything about. Nobody's ever heard of them. This is, of those unknown works, probably one of the better known, but even so, you'll go a long day's travel without meeting anyone who's ever heard of this, much less read it. But Pat Rogers, in the introduction to this work, mentions something that's absolutely true, which is that when the 18th century dawned, the roadways, the byways, even the major highways, the town roads in England were in no better shape, no safer, and no more maintained than they had been all throughout the Middle Ages. They looked and acted, they traveled much the same as they had for 1,000 years. And in this time period, that started to change. Roads started to be much better kept after by councils in the various towns along the way who erected themselves and financed themselves specifically for that purpose. Safety on the roads started to be prioritized to a small extent. The Royal Mail would come along very shortly after this. Defoe sensed that. He had an incredible sense of things like that, of what to write about, of what people would find interesting. It's all part of the weirdness of the man that I alluded to yesterday. How I wish that I could hold up a nice fat biography of him that in any way captured that weirdness. There was one. It's a fairly well done production from, I think, probably about 20 years ago in America. But it was way too much. This is the author of Robinson Crusoe, and way too little. This is Daniel Defoe, who, in an idle weekend, spurred by a get-rich-quick scheme, not really thinking about anything, at one point inadvertently wrote Robinson Crusoe, but did all this other stuff, mainly. It was that kind of a biography, and how I wish I could hold up a biography that wasn't like that, and maybe there is one, and I just don't know about it. But one way or another, this is a large national inventory. And you might think that would be boring. But you have Defoe along for the ride, and he misses nothing. And he is caustic, but in a reserved and intellectual way the whole time. So one of the great little pastimes in decades past in England was to commemorate, to smile at the reference to your town, if it comes up on this itinerary. But in a way, this is as valuable a volume as Democracy in America by de Tocqueville. I don't think they're at all reckoned on the same value wavelength, but I think they belong on the same value wavelength. And I want to read you just a bit of what I'm talking about. Not anything outstanding, just a sample of what you'll. Black Oak Books, Berkeley, California. Does Black Oak Books still exist? Let's see here. Biddisford is a pleasant, clean, well-built town. The more ancient street, which lies next to the river, is very pleasant, where is the bridge, a very noble quay, and the custom house. And besides this, there is a new spacious street, broad as the High Street in Exchester, well built, and which is more than all, well inhabited, with considerable and wealthy merchants who trade to most parts of the trading world. Here, as is to be seen in almost all the market towns of Devonshire, is a very large, well-built, and well-finished meeting house, and by the multitudes of people which I saw come out of it, and the appearance of them, I thought all the town had gone thither, and begun to inquire for the church. But when I came to the church, I found that that also large, spacious, and well filled, and that with most of the people of the best fashion. The person who officiates at the meeting house in this town I happened to have some conversation with, and found him to be not only a learned man and a master of good reading, but a most acceptable gentlemanly person, and one who, contrary to our received opinion of those people, had not only good learning and good sense, but abundance of good manners and good humor. Nothing sour, cynical, or morose in him, and in a word, a very valuable man. And as such a character always recommends a man to men of sense and good breeding, so I found this gentleman was very well received in the place, even by those who he differed from in matters of religion, and whose difference did not, as is usual, make any breach in their conversing with him. His name, I remember, was Bartlett, but this is a digression. I wish I could say the like of all the rest of his brethren. And that is fascinating. Little notes like that. I mean, it's interesting if you're from Biddisford, of course, but it's also interesting because of you can dig so many details out of descriptions like that. In particular, in this particular time that Defoe is writing, that offhand mention that this particular Bartlett person is esteemed by everyone, even the people he disagrees with religiously. That's very, very interesting. And you get little details like that all throughout here. Now, the one reservation that I have about those little details, and therefore about this book, when we come to the recommendation part of your Penguin Classic for the day, is that the more you know about Defoe, and the more especially that you know about this time period, the 1720s, thereabouts, the more you're going to get out of this book. The more you're going to get out of little details, like little sections like the one I just read, where it might strike you as boring if you don't know what to look for. Unlike, for instance, a Journal of the Plague Year, where you can go in cold. The human drama is going to keep you right on the edge of your seat the whole time. That won't be true with this, but even so, the editor here has much to answer for. This should not be abridged. This should be a nice big brick of a thing. Give me all of it. Perfectly fine if it's Ryan Smallwood, but if it's Daniel Defoe, give me all of it. And I'll decide what I like and don't like. Anyway, that is your Penguin Classic for today. It's yet more Daniel Defoe. I really don't think I have any other Daniel Defoe, except maybe some of the fiction. If I remember correctly from glancing at the shelf when I grabbed this, the fiction is not with the nonfiction. So who knows where it is. But one way or another, that is your Penguin for today. It's a journey through the whole of the island of Great Britain by Daniel Defoe. So, lesser known classic. Very glad that Penguin does it. Very glad I have a copy. And I'm going to wrap this up for now. You heard a doorbell ring, so did I. So we will see what that is. And I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.